She was the refreshing lightness of margarine for a digestion oppressed by creamy clots of desai ghee, devoid of the grease that clogged fingernails hours after breakfast, grease that polished the jars in which Amma placed the butter. Here, instead of the patterned oily secretions which flowed like rivers on the table, was the laundered freshness of cotton tablecloths. She sat sipping white wine in the parlour of a Cambridge college, one of the 3 guests at the dinner held by Professor Trevor Twiss for his pupils. Shazday had been looking at her for a while, but could not find words to ink into portraits of appreciation. The couplets that Persian poets wrote to their mistresses rarely involved English roses from the preened gardens of Hampshire. There were no canopies of dark lashes shading eyes larger than swollen moons to marvel at. She was without the veil behind which beautiful faces often wait anxiously to be discovered. She was a woman, but open and airy like a meadow, one who could be found swaying in a garden. A cat made its way through shadows, pretending to be trees, and appeared at the window. It watched the butler stumble over its gaze before disappearing again. Men sat on beds of broken ropes in open courtyards. Local flies sucked the last drops of sugar from the orange pips the men savagely spat out. Such evenings were made for storytelling, almost as if the sky itself was illustrated with storybook pictures and not stars. Sometimes there were tales of historic bravery, mostly doubtful ancestors who were said to have impressed Alexander's merry men so much that they were invited to join their army. There were stories of divine retribution against an English colonel who had prohibited his servants from praying at the mosque. God's wrath fell on him one day, hitting him on the head like a small wooden box. He survived the injury, but lived like a man who expects to meet death around every corner he turns. The fear of turning corners made him devote the rest of his life to sweeping the courtyard of the local shrine, where he lived as a beggar. He died a saint, of the lowest order. There were tales of terror. Some men's eyes had witnessed the horrible rancour of mad jinns dancing in the ancient fort. There were wonders, too, of cinemas and cities and the white man's conquest of the moon. Amid such a gathering, on such an evening, Tismar Khan, the local poet, arrived late and short of breath, announcing that he had received news of Shazday. A new tale of love was to be told. A hushed silence sealed their broken lips, as Shazday was the only son of their leader, and thus the future of their tribe. They had battled with mosquitoes on fiery nights, fanning him to a peaceful sleep. Tears stabbed their eyes as they thought of their master in a foreign land, ruled by the devil. "Tell us, how is our young lord?" they cried in unison. He was as dear to them as a son born after 6 daughters is to his mother. The poet assured them of his good health, and then proceeded to describe the latest disease that threatened to engulf Shazday. But they were sure he must have lost weight. In such distant lands the food was prepared without ghee, dry and light like air. It was that light food that made the souls of white men so flimsy. He must have grown weak on such a diet, the boy's delicate body tired from carrying the weight of his heavy soul. They wanted to know of the danger that sat so close to him. "Is she more beautiful than the fairy that bewitched Prince Saif on the banks of the glacier that is 100 villages away? Tell us what your eyes have seen, for you are the most eloquent amongst us." The poet moved a few paces away, afraid that the God-fearing Muslim men might smell the wine on his breath. He had spent the afternoon drinking with the jinns at the ancient fort and had heard the news from one of them. The informant was a jinn who roamed in ancient colleges like the ghost of a hanged man. He had peered into the lighted window of the oldest of the colleges, disguised as a black cat, and had almost fallen in love with what he saw there. Had she walked under a swollen tree that night, he would surely have possessed her. poet began his story. Her hair is long and meanders like streaks of spilt honey on sand. It covers her neck and shoulders like a silken veil embroidered with gold threads. One of the men made a gesture to his eyes, for he habitually got drunk on the seductive eyes of the local dancing girls. Her eyes are not fat and large and gaping, like seas of sewage water that flood the village after the monsoon. The angel who stenciled them in was a clever calligrapher and kept them delicate like a doll's, pouring into them the dirty grey glaciers of mountain valleys. But they have a pickled mischief, which has ignited the taste buds of our young lord. Even as a boy he was fond of the pickles Amma prepared, stealing them from the jars with his tiny hands while we were fast asleep, another of the men remembered fondly. The men startled the flies with their violent gestures of appreciation and urged the poet to continue. The rest of her features are painted with equal care, but it is her lips that would make one feel a stupor in the afternoon. Not that I know much about stupor, as Allah knows I have never even dreamt of the taste of alcohol. But those lips like the pink glow of an expiring sun balanced on a minaret. The scent from a bouquet of roses fills the air when she speaks. She is so like a rose herself, but not like the heavy roses that we have here that decorate the beds of newlyweds. An English rose is long and reserved, dispelling little fragrance, if any at all. The tallest among the men, who had a hennaed beard, stood up. It was said that his anger was even redder than his beard. You talk of a creature similar to the witch my grandfather told us about, a witch who was the mistress of our enemy, who is said to have cursed the future of our entire tribe. In the land ruled by Satan, the curse of the witch can easily burgeon in such beautiful roses. As the son of the great Kabir Khan, I say we should wage a war and trample such gardens of sin. I say we set off now to protect our young lord. The poet, a closet vegetarian himself, was frightened by the boiling blood of his warrior spirit and sought to appease him. Hold your hot words for a while. Shazday has only looked at her once, and besides, she's already committed to another man. There is no need to worry, for now. The men hung their heads in despair. Their lord, weak from light food, the easy prey of a witch's curse in the land of the devil himself. The couple took to swiping the flies in their lust for revenge, until smoke from the mud huts beckoned them home to dinner. The butler replaced the half-eaten salmon with a porcelain bowl brimming with strawberries and cream. Shazday concentrated on the sweetness of the dessert rather than the tastelessness of the food before. The main course had been blander than the conversations that had accompanied it. He missed home, unable to decide whether he hated the people here or the food more, but at least the latter could be made more palatable by vigorously shaking a salt pitcher until all the tongue could feel was salt. But she felt different. He could not find her insipid. The advice he had received at home regarding white women and their ways was buried under a huge heap of salt. They had warned him of the dangers of looking in their eyes, but they were like nets with which they hunted men. The lighter their colour, the darker were their thoughts. He had seen the pickled mischief in her eyes that appeared glazed with drops of vinegar, lemon and salt. He could taste those eyes by just looking at them. The only woman on the table that evening had revealed to him what bare shoulders looked like in real life. Smooth, like a white stone washed by a white river. There were contours in her body that twisted his heart at each bend. A new shape for a woman, with skin on shoulders and legs instead of black cloth that shrouded all like a coffin. He discovered that reality was more beautiful than fantasy, and the hours he had once spent dreaming of the faces, waists, and legs behind veils now seemed a waste of time. He had been looking at her since their introduction before dinner. Shazday had shaken her hand, the first feminine hand he had ever held. He felt the touch numb his senses like the first bite of an unripe mango. She was discussing the gardens of stately homes in Sussex. Her boyfriend stared blankly at the portraits of stern aristocrats, desperately searching for some resemblance. The old tutor snored gently, oblivious to a string of dribble that rocked to and fro from his mouth. Shazday's eyes sought to catch her attention so he could begin a conversation. His mind was full of incomplete opening sentences with dramatic dots at the end. How beautiful a night it was, as if some stranger or perhaps even a djinn had replaced the water in the river with Indian ink and smudged the darkness onto the sky and colleges with his inky hands. And then should he proceed to say that she was more beautiful than 1,000 such nights? He felt awkward in the stiff collar that clasped his neck, wearing a tie that was striped loudly like the trousers of a clown. The light in the room accentuated the darkness of his skin that had once resembled the colour of wheat, but that evening it was plain brown. He was a foreigner in their party, and could not look for ancestors in the portraits on the walls. His family name was far too difficult to pronounce for it to have any meaning. A second conquest by the British had begun. He was listening carefully to their discussion of the beauty of Sussex gardens, followed by the noble deeds of the great men on the walls. The tall men in dull brass frames had built a great empire. They had civilized many a barbaric tribe by placing colourful ties on the necks of their leaders. They were magicians who had the power to change proud men into coconuts with white insides beneath black skins. He had been introduced to those men and their grandsons and had survived through 2 courses of dinner, only to falter at dessert when he used the wrong spoon and decided he was in love. The cat appeared at the window again, staring into the room. A cat that was once only a college cat, before its possession by a djinn. The men were all asleep in courtyards lined with roasted cow dung, tired after a long day of packing mangoes in crates marked export. They slept through the second conquest, as they had done during the first. Without a tribe willing to wage war against an ancient curse, he spoke to her of her plans for the summer. She talked of visiting Florence and of the wonders of European art and literature. The old tutor cleared his throat, and the butler brought the coffee.